Hey, this is Nate the Woodsman with Buck Ventures. You're listening to the Tracks and Tackle Podcast.
Hey folks, this week on Tracks and Tackle, we are joined by expert dog trainer Ethan Young to dive into the world of blood tracking dogs, the hidden heroes of the hunt. From training tips to tracking triumphs and a deep look at changing laws across the country, you're not going to want to miss this game-changing conversation. Tune in, let's go. Hey folks, welcome back to Tracks and Tackle, where nature is your playground. This is Ron Menser, the Arrow Eagle, and we got a good one for you tonight. With us tonight on the phone, we got Mr. Ethan Young, who is the owner of Hunt Dog. He is an expert dog tracking, and he's in the blood trailing business. And you got guys like us that like to bow hunt, and you don't always get that great hit. Ethan's the guy you want to call, right? So, Ethan, why don't you just introduce yourself? One of in the promo to this, I was just saying, like, sometimes that dog is the hero of the hunt. So, why don't you introduce yourself to our audience?
My name's Ethan Young. I live down here in South Arkansas, and I train dogs professionally to blood trail wounded game or scent trail wounded game. I grew up hunting deer with dogs. We had beagles. We bred and hunted those, and we would just grab one of them anytime we banged up a deer and toss him in the woods. And a lot of times it would find the deer that we couldn't find, and it was awesome. And that's something I really wanted to get into as I got older. And then life happened, and I really didn't. But I got into bow hunting seriously in college and just started wounding the heck out of deer. I was just smashing the shoulder over and over again. And I finally was like, I'm getting another dog. And I did. And that has just totally taken over my life. And I've been having a blast. I've been doing it pretty seriously for about 5 years now.
Yeah, we were talking before we hit record here on the show, and you were just saying how much you're loving what you're doing. And I can only imagine, working with dogs, man's best friend. Like, I know there are people out there that aren't dog lovers, but that's not us. That's not most of us. So I can imagine doing it for a living. Not a bad way to spend the day.
It's super rewarding, super frustrating, because at the end of every program, I'm like, oh, these dogs are all firing on all cylinders. They're really well behaved. They understand me, my management system. And then I send them home and then get a batch of dogs that are all heathens and start over. That's a kind of weird part of it, but I'm having a blast doing it. It's a lot of work for sure, but it's just a good time.
Yeah, and you run. What do you run? Like it's so many weeks. Your course with the dogs, right?
Yeah, we aim for 6 weeks, but we keep them until they're hitting a certain standard that we've got defined. On the trailing side, it's 1,000-yard trail that's at least 24 hours old, has multiple turns and multiple what we call scent challenges, whether that be scent gap, like we've stopped applying the target odor in certain areas, or we've left what we call like a grid search, simulating like other people have gone out there and just stomped down the woods, or scent puzzles where we just kind of meander around and try to throw the dog offline. Or what's the other one? Oh, bat tracks, which I don't really see in the wild, but it's a good problem-solving tool for the dog's toolbox. But we aim for 6 weeks to have all that buttoned down to where we could put the rope in the handler's hand, and they could do really well. And we also have a part of our process is I have this handler guide that we send home with them. And in that is kind of this 2-week process for, they get their dog home. And then we've got a day-by-day, step-by-step things to do to really make sure all the skills are sticky and transferable from me to them. So
Yeah, you want to
when
solidify the process, right?
yeah. So we aim for that 6 weeks, but we keep them until they hit those standards. When they're ready, the owner comes out and does a go-home visit is what we call it. And we review that 2-week process together and go over everything to make sure they're pretty much prepared to go home and complete that process. Whether they do or don't, that can be hit or miss at times. I'm finding more and more of my people each year, and my people are the people that are kind of hooked, or they can tell they're going to be hooked, and they really buy into it.
Yeah,
kind of go wild.
That's awesome. How sorry, like I'm fascinated about this because, like I said, this is not my wheelhouse, and I got like 1,000 questions, but I'm going to try to do this in a structured way so that the listening audience can follow along.
Just send it.
Yeah. So, what got you started working with dogs? Like we all have like this, or why behind it, and so like that's if you can share with us a little bit about like what first drew you into the world of training dogs. And this specifically, this is a specialized role.
Yeah, I guess I'll kind of tell you a sequence of events. I mean, one of those things that really got me into it was obviously the dogs we had around our place. I mean, there was times where we had 30 to 70 beagles at our house, and we would take them hunting. And I remember a very key moment of getting to go with the guy that kind of started the race. He would take the dogs out in the woods and just kind of, get them to start bumping up deer and all that stuff. And I got to go with him, watched him jump up a buck, and I was like, that's amazing. And I wanted to do that forever after that. Got into the trailing side of it. I thought that was super fascinating, and then begged and pleaded with my dad to get a bloodhound. I was a little kid. He's like, no. He's like, you don't want a bloodhound. And I eventually worked for a gentleman one summer, putting hay on a trailer, and he gave me a red bone pup, and I had crazy intentions of training him and doing blood tracking. Like I'm 14 now. My dad can't tell me I can't do this, and I got him all started training, and he just got stolen out of my yard, and it was rough. And then the last thing that probably kind of charted this course, besides being terrible at bow hunting, the last thing was I had one of my best friends growing up. They had a board and groom business, and we were at their house all the time. And it was not uncommon for his mom to grab us and tell us to grab a leash and take dogs out.
Yeah.
And she was also the president of the Humane Society. And every so often we'd go over there and volunteer. And you get a wide array of personalities over there. So I don't know, dogs have always minded me pretty well. And I just found it super interesting, and didn't really, as soon as I got out of college and started a career, I didn't really do much, but I was bow hunting along that time, and just started having success getting them in within range, and then started hitting them, and feeling terrible about wounding them. I probably wounded 4 in a row, and I was like, I guess I can't bow hunt. And shot this good 8-point one time at 5 yards. I'd scouted, got out in this heavy rub line. I'm gonna ambush something here. He just came trotting up, and I shot him right in the chest. Terrible decision, but I was fired up and dumb. But called one of our buddies that also dog hunted in my area. He came out with a blue heeler, and they took a stroll in the woods from everything I could tell. And I was like, I'm getting a dog. And I did it for another 2 years. And then I wounded a doe. And I was like, I'm getting a dog. And then somebody dumped these 2 dogs on our road. That's pretty common out here in the country. People just abandon dogs all the time. Yeah, pretty sad. Yeah. Well, we worked for a couple of weeks and trapped him. And I kept one of them and trained him. And have just had a blast doing that. Piling up deer. That's the chaotic sequence of events, I guess.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. We all have a story, and each story is unique to ourselves. No one else has your story, And
Thank goodness.
I can think of being a young guy, and I say it all the time on the show. When I was younger, man, I just wanted to go out and shoot deer, and or whatever the game was that we were hunting. I just wanted to kill stuff. And, but there's that feeling when you do hit one that gets away. There's not much worse. I've gone through some stuff in life, and I've been fortunate. Like, I haven't had a bad life, but that's some of the roughest I've ever felt, emotionally, from an emotional point, because yeah, I'm taking that animal's life, but we use that animal, we eat the animal, and I don't want to see it wounded, you know. So anyway, that's part of hunting, and
Yep.
the dogs come in here, and one of the things that you had talked about was, because we'll get to this later, and I probably should hold this till later, but I know, like, laws are different in different states on what
Sure.
you can and cannot use dogs for, but you had said about, dogs pushing game, versus dogs tracking game, because I know, like, some states you can use your dogs to you go out west, you can tree a cougar.
Yeah.
But here in Pennsylvania, the rules are a little bit tighter. I mean, even from Pennsylvania to Maryland, where most of our audience is, I looked up, what the laws were on blood trailing, and it's completely different from PA to Maryland. So
Yeah, and in fact, Pennsylvania just legalized it, I think, in the last few years.
it's very recent, where the dogs could be used. So yeah. So we'll touch on that here in a little bit, but I want to sort of like build this. So, like, we got your backstory now. What I'd like to do is just understand the basics of dog training. Like, I got 2 dogs. I grew up with dogs. I went to, like, took my dog to obedience school and stuff. But, like, take me through, like, your guiding principles on, if you're a young guy out there listening to the show, or a young gal, and you got that dog, and you want to teach them to listen. Let's start there, and then we can get into, like, teaching them to track.
I gotcha. Yeah. I guess if I had to say some guiding principles, one, just how do animals learn, including humans?
Mm-hmm.
That's something important to know. But I would say I repeat this to a lot of my clients, and that's 3 things that are required for a dog to be successful at something. One is we have to give them clear communication from their perspective on what we want them to do. And they don't come pre-programmed to speak English. We basically associate sounds or physical cues with a thing that we've rewarded them for doing in some way. So clear communication from their perspective. 2, we have to provide sufficient motivation for them to do it. Kind of what's in it for them if they do it, or what's in it for them if they don't do it.
Yep.
I'm big on the what's in it for them if they do it. Largely
More of the carrot,
positive reinforcement based. Yeah, absolutely. Always start with the carrot, in my opinion.
Yep.
And then 3, they have to have the physical ability to do it. And you start seeing that matter a lot on, longer, more difficult tracks, or things like, I want my dog to jump up on the tailgate, and I'm getting frustrated because he is small, but I'm asking him something he just, like, physically can't do, like a basset hound, trying to get him to jump on a lifted truck's tailgate. So those things, clear communication, sufficient motivation, and they have to have the physical ability to do it. That's kind of how I summarize it all. And then obviously you can start pulling on threads there and find that there's a lot of nuance to all that. So, like I mentioned, with clear communication, that's verbal, physical, whether prompts or, like, leading them around with a leash, whatever, all kinds of things can be our communication. Gear we wear, gear they wear, processes we follow. A lot of people have a dog that behaves really well at their house and in their routine, and then their dog's a total nutcase if somebody comes to visit, because it's that specific thing hasn't been trained, but where they thrive is in routine, and this is out of their routine and not necessarily trained specifically.
I'll tell you a short story. My dogs are the opposite, right? I mean, they're good, but here at the house, it's like this is their kingdom. They get away with that, whatever. But if we take them someplace, like they're good as gold. Like people are like, man, your dogs are so good. I'm like, man, you don't come hang out at our house. They don't act this well. They're just like kids.
So did your trainer take them out and about a whole lot?
No, so like I mean, these dogs we've trained them ourselves.
Okay.
And so like I don't know, my dogs, I couldn't even tell you how old they are. They're probably like 7 and 8 years old, or 6 and 7, 8, somewhere around there. So that, I mean, they're old enough to know better, and but they're spoiled too. They're spoiled old house dogs. But it's amazing how, like, one of the things you said, like they can cue on like the gear you're wearing, or like they know whenever I'm putting on a certain pair of shoes, like we're going to work, or we're going on a hike,
100%.
or like we're going to the swimming pool and I'm going to get in the water. And that, the lab, she digs that. So
I bet.
they cue on certain things like that. One of the other things you had mentioned was, their physical ability. So I imagine, the traits of a good working dog, like what are like some breed characteristics and temperament that you would be looking for if you had a dog that you wanted to take through the process?
Yeah, they obviously have to have some level of endurance and drive for this task, and we can influence that to a degree. So I guess we'll go to kind of item 2, sufficient motivation. That's going to be somewhat dog dependent, individual dog as well as separate breeds and their typical characteristics. Like different things motivate or different things reinforce different breeds. Some are bred to catch little twitchy movement out in the woods and freeze and stare at it. Some are bred to just follow all kinds of cool smells. And so probably the biggest characteristic that is really good to have for this task is a dog that it's got some sense between its ears and can understand that sticking with this odor in a highly distracting environment pays well. And that boils down to a little bit of that dog, but a lot of how you provide motivation and relative motivation. So, finding a smelly deer leg and working really hard to do that is not as cool as chasing a deer that's running through the woods to some dogs.
Right.
It's way cooler to some other dogs. So you can influence that to a degree, but breed characteristics a lot of times are also going to have a large role in that.
So I've got two, and I'm not looking to train my dogs to track, but I'm just using them because that's my frame of reference. Like, I've got two like sheep dogs, herding dogs. Like, so like they're super intelligent, but they're high energy. And so like something as simple as like one of my dogs really food motivated, right? So if we put their feed down together, like she's gonna eat her food and want to tear into her sister's bowl too. So we got to feed them in separate parts of the kitchen. And we've taught them both, like we make them pray before they get their meal. And it's really just to help her like calm down before she eats, because otherwise she's ready to like take it out of my hand. But have doing that for years now, she knows when it's mealtime, she still gets excited, but she knows she's got to lay down, cross her paws, and wait for me to say in Jesus' name. And then she can eat.
Yeah. And I'm big on doing that same, principle with trailing. I build a pretty strong and repeatable process as one of my tools for communicating to them that we're doing this task, as well as communicating to them, like, here's the standards I'm going to hold you to on that task.
Right on.
So, I have a process of I call it box to box, all the way from getting them out of the dog box to putting them back in. It's routine, and it's a performance, and Uncle Ethan's holding you to a high standard. I'm also giving you awesome access to things and awesome rewards and awesome play, but for you to hold up your end of the bargain, you have to do have to be on your best behavior and work for me.
Yeah, I mentioned one of the things is, the handler has to be disciplined to make that happen, right?
100%. I think the more consistent we are as handlers, the easier the dogs are. I mean, they kind of just train themselves if we're consistent with our communication, both verbal and physical, and the expectations we set for them.
Sure, sure. What are some like common misconceptions about training? As we get into like the blood tracking and training them to trail, like what are some common misconceptions about these type of dogs?
I think a big one that surprises a lot of people is just how a lot of them work, maybe differently than we envision. So a lot of folks envision a dog that's just glued to the ground, following the line perfectly.
Right on a rope, right?
And there are breeds that display that behavior and are kind of hardwired to hunt that way, for sure. Like a lot of the hound breeds very much look like that. Not necessarily saying they stick with the task, but they look like that all the time. And then there's other breeds that, instead of staying, right on the ground and close to source, they're working outside into more of the plume or the kind of larger dispersion area of the scent. And it looks really different to a lot of people, especially if they don't have a frame of reference for how that dog is naturally going to work. And they might go out with a pointer dog that's bred to kind of head upwind, search with its eyes, just basically cast around and get in, odor pockets and point stuff. They might get out there, put a string on this dog, and expect it to look like a bloodhound from Fox and the Hound, and then they get frustrated and try and jerk the dog around to make it look like how they envision. And all they do is kind of sour their relationship with the handler and sour the relationship to the dog with this task. And I think that's probably one of the biggest misconceptions. What does it actually look like when they're doing a good job of this task?
Yeah, I imagine just like anything else, reps matter, like repetition. Like, so the more the dog does it, the more it understands expectation, the more it understands reward, the more it understands, clear expectation versus unmet expectation.
Yep, and that's a double-edged sword. If they're someone told me one time, dogs learn what we teach them, not necessarily what we intend to teach them. And if your reps have issues, your dog is going to be continually reinforced to have those same issues. For instance, we'll pick like a bloodhound. I'll pick on them for a second, but they're kind of notorious for going on side quests, partially because they're hard to read. Everything they do looks like your ideal picture of a trailing dog.
Mm-hmm.
Some other dogs are a lot easier to read. And so you might, when you don't know the answers to this test, or you don't know the specific layout of this line or what the deer did, and you're letting your dog disengage from this task and roam around in the woods, and remember, he might be hardwired to get a whole lot of good chemicals in his head by just sniffing a variety of things. So he's going on an adventure. You're just standing behind him with the string, letting it happen. And he's like, this thing ain't so bad. I like trailing. And in your mind, trailing means, hey, stick with this odor until we find a deer. And in his mind, he's like, trailing's cool. Sometimes we find a deer. Sometimes we find raccoons. Sometimes we find dead animals. Sometimes we find turtles. He's just having a good time.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's just loving life.
Oh, that's great. That's a great picture. You paint the visual. Well, what makes blood tracking, like, let's shift into that. Like, what makes it so much different than regular obedience or hunting training?
So I'll speak for myself and my approach and the approaches I took growing up with hunting. I mean, we would breed beagles. We would pack train them, meaning we would take them out and let them, just puppies, follow older dogs that knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
And they would sink or swim, and we would turn them into pet dogs and,
find the
trade
ones
them
that
to
were
a
good at what
guy
they
in the
did.
parking lot. Yeah. Yeah. There was some Me Too dogs that were just like, yeah, whatever you're doing, I'm doing. It's awesome. And with this and my approach, we try and develop a really independent dog that can do this task on their own. There are some states that allow multiple dogs to do it, but I've seen that handicap a lot of dogs because they're, just like me, like I'm not following the deer and, checking out the ground disturbance and following the blood trail. I'm following the dog. I'm letting him do the hard work.
Sure.
And a new dog will do the same thing with an experienced dog a lot of times. They'll be like, hey, this is awesome. I'm going to hang out. When that dog starts barking, I'm going to go over there and have a cool reward. And those same reps, talking about quality reps, a dog like that. And I'm guilty of it at times. I've got a dog that was kind of a Me Too dog for a while, but a dog like that is getting reinforcement for not doing what you intend to teach them. They're like, I come out here in the woods, hang out. When the dog barks, we find a reward, and that's my role here. It's like that dog does the hard work. I show up, and if it's still alive, I help it catch it. Otherwise, I just hang back till the fun starts. And they don't know any better if you can't clearly communicate that they need to do something different. And I think that's, at least from my experience with hunting dogs, as far as using dogs to pursue deer, live, healthy deer, that's the biggest difference, is just our approach of tossing them out there, letting them sink or swim, versus this is we have a very well thought out step-by-step process that gets them independent of the handler, not just independent of other dogs, but independent of us. We kind of influence the environment or structure the environment and the scenarios to add to their toolbox, and we let them solve their own problems and be, very self-reliant.
Right on. So, success stories, techniques and training, like give me, like, what does the process look like? Give us like your how-to, because I know, like you said, you've been doing this for a couple of years, and we touched early on, you got like a 6 to 8 week process. Like, walk us through that.
Week one is kind of, I'm trying to convince them, and genuinely, not with any tricks or anything, I'm trying to convince them that I'm super cool, and that I'm going to keep them safe, and we're going to party and do fun stuff together. So I make sure we have a good relationship, and then we start introducing, tasks to them, because some dogs perceive pressure differently, and I try and make sure, they show up at my place and they're like, this is new. There's new dogs. It's a new place. There's new environmental allergens. It's crazy. And then I go out there and I'm like, hey, smell this animal that died. And then like young dogs are like, oh my gosh, are you going to do that to me too? This, like, you killed a deer. They're hardwired to have a good idea of what that smell is. And I've seen a lot of dogs go on high alert. And I think it's important to introduce that the right way. So I'm maybe overly cautious, but we work hard to make sure it's a really positive, not too stressful introduction to that odor in that task. And a lot of that has to do with them seeing you as someone who's not going to put them in any kind of danger. And that just straight up might take a couple of days or a week for them to feel that way, because they just, left everything they ever knew.
Yeah, it's
a lot of dogs are like, yeah. They've lived in the living room and in the backyard their whole life with the same 2 people and the other 2 dogs. And then, there's this crazy redneck in South Arkansas that smells like dead animals. And they're like, this is chaos. I'm scared. But we have a good time. I really make sure they think I'm cool. And then the first thing I do related to trailing is I usually lay 150 to 200 yard track with hooves from deer that I track.
Right.
So these are whitetail hooves, unless somebody sent me one from like a big game state with like different parts. But I lay that 150 to 200 yards with a single 90-degree turn, and it's a legitimate 90. It's crispy, as I call it. It's not rounded or anything. And we take them out there and start building that quote unquote process that we talked about. And the first step of that process to me is just try and keep it low pressure and relaxed. And I take them out there. We've got, this unique tracking lead, and we kind of just take them to the area and let that new odor and its novelty hopefully inspire curiosity to follow it. Some dogs, young dogs or spooky dogs, they smell it and they're like, oh my gosh, this guy's going to kill me just like he killed this deer. And they get real stressed out, and we work through that. Sometimes you can work through it in track, like just out there with them. kind of letting them just slowly pick it apart and realize that like nothing bad's going to happen. There's actually something cool at the end.
Yep.
Some dogs, I have a bloodhound out here right now. He gave me rope burn. He started trailing. It was just easing on. You know, when dogs have those like sticky back legs where they don't want to commit fully to what they're checking out, their back legs are way back.
Yeah.
He was doing that. He went about 100 yards and then just decided, something bad was going to happen. And he just bolted, peeled the rope through my hands, gave me a rope burn. And I just stopped and didn't try and really pressure him to keep going. I tried to be like, well, you can trust me to put this leash on you and walk out of the woods. And he's like, I don't know that I can. So we sat there and hung out for a while and probably spent a whole week just showing him that I'm the whole week was Uncle Ethan's cool and Uncle Ethan's going to not put you in any situation where you're going to get hurt or anything. And I switched odors to start him. I went to beef liver, which you can get at like Walmart for like $4.
Right.
And just dragged that out in the yard since he had such a bad first experience, it seemed, with, the target odor. I laid a little liver drag and he checked it out for a little while and was like, no, you're trying to kill me again. I'm like, no, I'm not. And, we leashed him up and just kind of walked around and hung out, kept building that relationship. And just a few days ago, I took him out and he eased all the way to the end of one, gobbled up some liver, and then went back to the beginning and tried it again. Seems like that's kind of like, okay, this isn't so bad. And I'll probably stick with that for a while. But first up, introduce him to trailing. I use that 150, 200-yard track. Make sure they're confident and calm around it and not just on high alert. And we don't overpressure them to get started because I really think the first impression matters a bunch.
Yeah.
And then that whole first 3 or 4 tracks, we're just going to probably double the length, double the age. And we can usually get in doing 400 to 500-yard tracks on the 3rd or 4th attempts that are, 4 to 8 hours old. And then next week we start working on challenges. So we lay shorter tracks. They might stay in that 150 to 200-yard range, but in the middle of it, we've put some sort of scent challenge. Again, that's either a puzzle, a gap, scent pool, a backtrack, a grid search, those things. And we start trying to create every opportunity we can for independent problem solving. Basically, throw them off and then let them learn to reacquire the trail on their own over and over again. And we just build age and build the size of those challenges, build the complexity of those challenges all the way to the point of like, we're sending them home and they're well capable of 1,000+ yards, 20, like a whole day old, day and a half, 2 days. Huge challenges, football field size challenges. And that's essentially it on the trailing side. We stick with the hooves. We don't do anything special. I don't even use blood 99% of the time.
Okay.
I find it messy and irrelevant. Sure. There's a lot of bleeding deer that we don't want to spend our time trailing because it's some sort of flesh wound.
True.
So
it's true. Yeah.
We want them to stick with the pheromones that smell or that are signaling that this animal is like severely wounded and gonna die. As well as some of these, you might call a leg shot a superficial wound because on its own, it probably wouldn't cause infection and kill the deer because they're incredibly resilient. But in our area, predators are basically just going to run it down and eat it alive.
Yeah.
But we do also, ensure they can trail those. But that's basically it. They start to be able to discern healthy deer versus deer that's going to die. And that's what we want them trailing, not necessarily every bloody deer.
It sounds to me like, you're really like developing critical thinking skills, for these dogs to be able to, make those decisions and tell.
I do my darndest.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've tested dogs. I'm a member of the American Blood Trackers Association. I have a few roles in that organization, and one of them is I'm a certified judge. And we've tested dogs, and most recently at a Louisiana event, I had a handful of dogs that didn't pass, and there was a common theme among quite a few of them, and that was like when the going got tough, they would turn around and kind of look at their handler a lot of times like, all right, what's the answer to this test problem?
Yeah.
Boss. And so, I kind of call that like a handler dependency,
Mm-hmm.
and it's seemingly always inadvertently trained. And we do that out of genuinely wanting our dog to succeed. They start to struggle, and we're like, here, because I want you to be successful. I want you to get to the end of the track. Whereas I kind of take the approach, I want you to come away with skills here. I want you to think Uncle Ethan knows when you're farting around, but Uncle Ethan doesn't know the answers to the test. He can only tell, when you're not engaged with the task.
Yeah.
And, a lot of new dogs will stop and look at me, and I'm just like, I don't know.
Well, that's pretty cool that, being a judge and being part of that, because that's a national group, right?
Yes. We have testing all over the place, all the way up in your area. We've got some way out west. I think we have judges in California where it's not even legal there yet. If I'm not mistaken, I may be misremembering that, but yeah, we're the American Blood Trackers Association, growing pretty rapidly, testing events all over the place, private and event style tests, and we do seminars as well.
Yeah, I think my nephew, we've talked about this on the show before, but he's got a Labrador. She's probably 2, maybe going on 3 years old. And,
Heck yeah.
He's wanting to teach her, and he's been working with her and stuff. He's working with her before we started like getting guidance. And she does pretty good, for what he's done with her. But he started talking with some folks in that blood tracking organization. And, he got a lot of good advice on that, especially in Pennsylvania where everything's so new, right? So at the end of the day, I always say, like, there's somebody out there that knows more than me. There's somebody that I can learn from, and there's also somebody that I can teach, so it goes both ways. Sure. And having organizations like that is great for advocacies. What I'll do is I'll link to your YouTube. I'll link to your Facebook. Huntdog.org is the website. And certainly if anybody's got any questions or whatever, hit us up, and we'll try to get you in contact with Ethan. Ethan, any final words to the audience that you want to leave a lasting message with this group?
Oh man, if you bang up a deer or an elk or whatever game you got, and your state allows it, it's pretty cool to get a tracker to help you, a good qualified one, because a really well-trained dog can, one, give you a good shot at finding it if it is something that is recoverable, and two, it can tell you, a good reliable dog can tell you if it's a superficial wound. And I think that's one of the coolest things that dogs offer, is that kind of detection aspect. My dogs, they'll trail forever on something that's going to die or is dead. Mm-hmm. And the ones that are superficial, they've cataloged enough of those odors that they'll check it out, trail maybe anywhere from 60 to 200 yards, and then they're just kind of like coming back and they're like, let's go to the next one. And we get a lot of proof of life pictures via trail cams.
Sure.
That, they can tell. And it's super fun to watch, and super good, I think, for just hunting in general. All these photos of, deer in people's backyards with an arrow in their neck, or, people finding them just out in the woods after shooting them.
That's not good for the, outdoor industry at all.
No. And I genuinely see trailing as another level of effort towards conservation. And I just think it's fascinating and should be considered by all.
Yeah.
And it's a handy tool to put on your companion dog as well. That's kind of the people we target, is the people that, like, these dogs live in the house with us, and I throw the table food, take pictures. These are my companions, and I want them to have that skill of trailing.
Yeah, I'd love to have a dog to be able to do that, but so we're gonna have to talk more. We'll stay in contact. From a personal, offline. I want to pick your brain on several different things, but this has been fascinating to me. I really appreciate you taking the time out, and we worked through some issues. We're doing this over the phone. Hopefully everything records good and we can get an episode out of this. If not, man, we're just going to have you come back on. We'll try again.
Holler anytime. I love it.
All right, man. Well, hang on the line and we'll talk afterwards. But, for our listening and viewing audience, this is Ethan Young. He's the owner of Hunt Dog. You can find him at huntdog.org and get his contact and look him up there. Super cool guy, and really glad we were introduced through a mutual contact and just having some awesome conversations. So really appreciate you, Ethan, coming on the show. As anybody else knows, man, we're just going to encourage you to get outdoors. Nature is our playground. And always remember, stay wild, folks.